Welcome everybody. I can't tell you how relieved I was to see this coming up on my schedule this week because this is such a nice respite and such a nice change in pace from what I do the rest of the day. So today, I'm going to share a perspective with you, and I think it has some really significant relationship implications, although I'm not sure what all of them are, because this is something I'm just starting to notice with a lot of the clients that I work with, both couples and individuals. And it's this sentiment. I've heard it just super clear since March, when the first kind of pandemic wave hit the United States, and I've been hearing it very consistently since then. And it's this sentiment, this realization that my clients are having, that the feeling is nobody's coming, so it's up to me. And the thing that's really surprising to me about this, because I've worked for years with people who, feel and know that nobody's going to come help them. But the thing that's surprising me is, um, when my clients say this, it's ultimately empowering for them, and it almost opens up new possibilities. Um, for example, I work with a man who's single, and he's been isolating dutifully, um, and his realization came about 4 weeks into the pandemic, when he hadn't spent face-to-face time with friends. And he said this magic phrase: "I just realized that nobody's going to be coming." And what it changed for him is, instead of, he said, "I realized I've just kind of sat around like I normally would, waiting for people to call me and say, hey, we're going to do this, and or let's go do this." And he said, "I realized that call's never going to come." And so what it opened up for him was, I get to make each day whatever I want it to be. And I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me or invite me, this is what we're going to do. And his internal world and his perspective on what he can do, it's just opened up, in some really surprising ways. And it started with that recognition that nobody's coming. Whether it's the pandemic, I've also heard this. I heard it both in the 2016 election, and I heard it in this year's election. Things didn't go my way. Nobody's showing up to help me with what's important to me. I'm going to have to figure out what to do, instead of waiting for the outside to become good. I see it all the time in marriages, when couples that I work with, I think, finally understand that they don't come to marriage therapy for me to give them advice and tell them how to solve their problems, but I empower them to look at each other, to really feel what's going on, and to come to grips with reality, and to make their own choices. So when they have that, like, oh, nobody's coming, nobody has an answer for us, there's a real reinvestment in the relationship, and certainly in recovery, this happens. I recently read a quote from Brene Brown that said something like, don't wait for the leader to show up, or for someone to give you permission to be a leader. If you're a leader, stand and lead where you are. And I had an experience with that a few weeks ago. So I've talked about this in the webinar before. I'm on a board in my community that kind of oversees and makes recommendations to the city for trail maintenance, and making our trails a good experience, a good resource for people. And I was out the other day, kind of doing some surveying with another person on the board, and we were both pretty new to the board, and I noticed that we were talking like, oh, it'd be nice if so and so knew that this was going on, because they know how to make things happen, or we should let so and so know that we're seeing this issue, because I bet they have some perspective. And I stopped about an hour into that, and I thought, and I said, why are we waiting for somebody else? We're board members too, just like they are. What do you think should happen here? And it was another one of those, like, nobody's coming, or at least we don't have to wait for somebody to come. We are actually in a position where we can do something to make this better. Even if we don't know exactly what to do, we can certainly get a start. I think this has some huge relationship implications, because I think it's almost wired into us, that, from a young age, most of us wait for somebody to tell us what to do, for us to know what the program is. Or if we didn't break on that side of things, we certainly have the sense that somebody should be in charge, and somebody should be helping us. Either way, I think a lot of our relationship view is based on, are we all working together or not? Which is really natural because relationships are about coming together. But at the same time, I think there's a really fertile ground for growth and possibility that exists between balancing the needs of ourselves and the needs of others outside of us. And that's kind of where this comes in. We don't have to just wait for somebody to have an answer for us or somebody to make a breakthrough. One of the things I've been most, I think, interested by and pleased by in the pandemic is watching how innovative people get in solving problems that traditionally we would have waited, for some leader to tell us what to do, or how to do things. I think it's a little bit counterintuitive, but I think that it's helpful to look at. One of the implicit benefits of being in a relationship is hopefully you have access to two brains and two nervous systems. But what happens when one is maybe not functional, or what happens when there's one that we can't rely on? I think that perspective of nobody's coming, it may open up an ability or a realization that leadership has a role here. We don't just have to wait for one another to be in agreement and move forward together. Leadership isn't telling others what to do. It's about doing what's needed to be done right now, regardless of the buy-in, regardless of the help that you get or the shared perspectives. It's not just talking about what needs to happen. And this, to me, it goes back to some codependency principles and principles that I love from the Smart Recovery program, where, if you're on the partner side of the partner and addict addiction equation, doing what needs to be done isn't just about learning everything that you can about your partner's disease and outlining for them what they need to do. It's also about getting up and doing for yourself. It's about figuring out how to make yourself happy now. Because the reality that I see with most couples in recovery is relief certainly comes when one person, when the addicted person gets sober, but not total relief. I see the equation to that total relief, or for an addict in recovery, relief doesn't just come when their spouse, finally gets into treatment and they start working on the relationship. That's not the source of total relief. And oftentimes people are kind of disappointed by that. And they end up turning to this, what am I going to do with me? That's where I think this insight, nobody's coming, is empowering, because it turns us back to ourselves. It can turn on our creativity, and turn on our ability to innovate and find solutions to our problems. So with that idea, I want you guys to observe maybe some feelings that are coming up. One of them is, what does this free you up to do? This idea that nobody's coming, you don't have to wait. What scares you about this, that nobody's coming? I know for me, I love to blaze a new path, but I hate to do it alone. I'm happy to lead out, but I want people following behind me to, help me when I get lost. But what scares you about this idea that nobody's coming? And then what's the one thing that you would do today about a longstanding problem if you knew you didn't have to wait for other things to fall in place in order for you to start solving that problem? If it was completely up to you to solve it, what would you do first? So that is the topic for today. Like I said, it's not quite completely formed, but I think something that is valuable to meditate on and look at the implications for your relationship.
Thank you, Jon. That sparked so many thoughts for me. I'm working on a presentation or a discussion that I'm going to have with the guys at our treatment center on Thanksgiving. I'm filling in the morning, and they asked me to talk about gratitude, which is one of my favorite topics, but I kind of had to back up with as I'm putting this together to talk about gratitude, I had to go into topics like keeping my side of the street clean, and surrender and acceptance and grief. And you know, um, I'm scrolling over to my little sheet here. Surrender. I kind of wrote. A lot of times addicts are asked to surrender when they come in. We admit we are powerless over our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable, and they think that means the addiction has beaten them. And a lot of times that gives them a feeling of hopelessness. I'm weak. I'm hopeless. And I think partners often feel that way about the addict's addiction. But the point I want to make to people is that we surrender to reality. We don't surrender to the addiction. We surrender to the reality of having addiction. And then we can take steps to change it. And that sort of reminds me, it's like, nobody's coming to fix us.
Yeah.
We need to surrender to that reality, and then we can take some steps to change it. I like that. And then the other thing that really came up for me here, there's a passage in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's talking about the need to accept, or the need to surrender. And the passage reads, "When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Unless I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and my attitudes." And for me, again, nobody's coming. What can I do right now? What can I change right now? And 99% of the time, for me, the only thing I can change is my attitude.
Yeah.
I can't fix the world. I can beat my head against the wall trying, but other people are going to do what other people do. I can't make everyone wear a mask right now as much as I would like to. But I can wear a mask. I can protect myself and protect the people around me. And I can do that smiling under the mask, or I can do that gritting my teeth because that person over there doesn't have one on.
Yeah.
So yeah, nobody's coming. I love that. I think I had that sort of moment somewhere about a month or two into the pandemic. I just realized, oh, I'm going to have to fill my day.
Yeah.
How am I going to do it? I can sit here and just watch TV endlessly, but I'll just get bored and miserable and annoyed because I don't really like TV for the most part. Or I can, start reading books, and I can do some work on the house, and I made some decisions about how I was going to live my life. And it goes back to keeping my side of the street clean. That's all I can really do, one way or another. And nobody's going to do it for me.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to come over and sweep my side of the street for me. I have to do it. So I don't know. I had a lot of thoughts. So thank you.
Yeah, that brings up, I think one of my big moments is about a month in when, initially in Utah, they said schools are going to close for 2 weeks and then we'll reopen. And when, 4 and 6 weeks went by, I kind of had to come to grips with reality. They're not reopening. My kids are not going back to school this year. And, at first, I think all of us were just kind of waiting because in that, like, that provided so much socialization and so much stimulation and so much structure. Not only were they not reopening, but aside from come pick up your packets, we weren't really told what to do. And the attitude that changed for me was, this is an unprecedented opportunity. I have my kids right here all the time and they're hungry for structure and learning. Why don't we make something of that? My spouse and I too, we'd come to rely on, Saturday night was date night and we would go out and do something together. And one of the opportunities that came up here, recognizing like we're not going to feel safe in restaurants and theaters aren't opening anytime soon. So what are we going to do? We shifted tack and we really got into how does it feel to be in our relationship? Let's talk more about that. Let's figure out how to do something about that. we were talking this morning on our hike, and I was saying, I'm going to be sad when other opportunities open. I hope we don't leave everything that we're doing, because as much as I miss some of that, I'm so glad that we kind of took the reins in our own life and we figured out some things together.
Yeah,
But it all
the old
started with that.
saying,
Nobody knows what to do, and they're not going to tell me if they did.
yeah, the old saying, when God closes a door, he opens a window. And
Yeah.
I think this pandemic has, the realization that nobody's coming, I better do something with my life, has either sent a lot of people tail spinning into deep depression, or it's opened some windows and we've crawled out them. And I don't want my life to go back exactly the way it was before the pandemic. I've
Yeah.
learned some things about myself and how I like to spend my time that are different than what I was doing. So it really is an opportunity. Your three questions: what does this free me up to do? That's the big one for me. What does this free me up to do? What can I do with my life that I wasn't doing before? And then what scares me about it, and what can I do, with the long-standing problems. So anyway, let's get to our questions. So type questions into the Q&A feature. We are happy to answer them. So first one here. Hello, thank you for the work that you do. Very much appreciated. This is from a trade partner. Started using new vocabulary every time I feel triggered or not safe by saying, I don't feel safe when ... or I need this in order to feel safe. Good for you. Even by implementing this vocabulary, I'm still struggling to make my sex and love addictive partner understand and listen to my needs. Let's just stop there for a second. Because I hear this a lot from betrayed partners. My addict partner, I express my needs and he or she is not able to hear them and take them in right now. How long does it take before the addict partner sort of gets to the point where they can actually hear it and feel it?
I think there's some global timelines, and there's also some really specific issue timelines. So the global timelines, I was just talking to a couple yesterday. I think this is completely unfair and completely unjust, but most addicts will enter recovery and they have not yet considered what it actually takes for them to be a healthy, happy, whole person. That I think is a necessary foundation to then consider in a relationship, because you have to start with a template that, first of all, people can be happy and healthy, and there's something we can do about that. You also have to start with a template of, I know a little bit about what does that for me, so I can maybe start to make some guesses about what might happen for you. What I see generally is anywhere from 1 year to 18 months is kind of where that shift happens. And like I said yesterday to this client, it is so unjust and it's completely unfair that it takes that long. But there's really a lot of foundational things that I would say a lot of addicts are missing. And if they're serious about their recovery, they'll come to it, they'll recognize, oh, when you were saying all this time that you didn't feel or you needed blank from me, that wasn't control. That was you advocating with me for your needs, because that's what you do in a relationship. And I think that comes to the more specific issues. I'm looking at the language here. I don't feel safe when, or in order to feel safe. Depending on what the background is of your addicted partner, that word safe may not actually mean anything to them. They may not have a visceral experience with it. It's not that it doesn't make sense. It's that it doesn't resonate emotionally, because they may never have experienced that. And that, I don't know how long that takes, because that can come at anywhere in the journey. Some people, the first time they walk into a 12-step room and they're greeted by people who look them in the eye and aren't judging them, it clicks and they say, oh, that's what safety feels like. That's huge. I don't want to trade that for anything. Others, it may take them longer to come out of their shell and to understand what safety actually means and feels like, because they have to have that personal experience before it really resonates for them.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. That's why I wanted to stop right there. Okay, so this continues. When explaining the reasons I don't feel safe or I'm not ready, he validates my feelings by adding and expressing his feelings by saying that this is not a normal, healthy, happy relationship, that we never get along since we've been together, we've never gotten along. This is a 2-year relationship. And that I'm imposing over him, controlling him, that he feels on a leash and cannot live like this. So let's stop there again. How common is that, and what can be done?
It's like 100% common. I'm
Yeah,
really sorry. I'm really sorry. It's like 100% common. And, a big chunk of that has to do with how a lot of addicts are set to understand how relationships are supposed to work. Some of that has to do with the approach. I'll start with approach, but please understand, this isn't blaming. This isn't like something that people would know intuitively. It makes sense for us to talk from our own perspective. However, talking from your own perspective with someone who hasn't shared your experience, it can be like speaking a foreign language to them. So a lot of times, the way that we express our needs in a relationship, it can be, there can be some implied ultimatum there, even if we don't mean to. But the truth is, there's always ultimatums in relationships. There's always, in order to stay with this, I need XYZ. And because you're my partner, you're the one who provides that. I think it's actually more to the point to be able to use that language. Hey, in order for me to feel happy and safe and invested in a relationship, here's some of the things I need from a partner. What do you think about that? If we're honest, when we get into a relationship, we really don't expect we can't expect our partners to know everything about what we need and be able to do it. We have to train them a bit. We have to discuss, and we even sometimes, I think, have to lobby for and teach why it's important, what we need. And so cutting right to the point and being able to say, in order for me to feel invested in a relationship moving forward, there's some basic things that I need. And at the end of the day, it's simply a matter of, are you willing and able to go here or not? And I need to know the answer to that, because if you're willing to go there, and maybe it's hard to understand and get on board with now, but maybe you want to, I could do that. As long as I know that there's a willingness there and there's a space for my needs. And this is another thing that I think really throws addicts off about it in the beginning. They normally do not think in terms of, what am I needing and how does that impact me? They more think in terms of, is this working or not? That's where that comment of, well, we've never got along. Long-term relationships aren't just about we got along. It's about we learned how to see each other and give each other what we need. Again, that's a worldview. That's a relationship experience that a lot of sex and love addicts just don't have. But it's not, I don't think it's helpful to lower the bar. I think it is helpful to talk very clearly about expectations and to make it clear, if you feel this way, if you're willing to work on this, I have so much more patience in me. I have so much more time in me. If you're not willing to look at it, this is going to be problematic for us.
yeah, and addicts, just for the record, don't see things very clearly early in recovery. So to say we never got along, but you've been together 2 years, well, I find it very hard to believe that you never got along if you've been, but addicts will generalize and make hurtful statements like that. And it's more about, I think, being in denial and protecting himself than attacking you.
Yep.
So, okay, so this continues.
By the way, I'd say this is where Dr. Rob's book, Out of the Doghouse, I think is so helpful for addicts with that perspective. Because it's one of those, it's a real talk about how there actually are conditions in relationships, and that is normal and that is healthy. It's good for the two of you to make those conditions explicit so that you can understand whether or not you actually can help your partner with what they need.
Yeah, so type questions into the chat feed or into the Q&A. Somebody said in the chat I was not loud enough, so I turned my volume up. I hope that helps. So this continues. He said, I prefer to start a new relationship from scratch with another person as a new me, with the not acting out and without the post acting out situation. I feel stigmatized because no matter what I do, I cannot enjoy the benefits and improvements. FYI, it's been 2 months since our disclosure. And I think it continued below. He says he's frustrated because he's not seen any changes in me, that I'm always angry, and he's not seeing that I can be capable of forgiveness at all. After all these, indeed, I ended up being more angry at him. Any advice? I'm considering throwing in the towel and going through trauma recovery by myself.
I'll start by saying that's an option. And for you, the best thing you can do is put all the options you can on the table for yourself. Again, this is one of those nobody's coming. You can't assume that there is something that you can say or do to get your partner to change. The best you can do is try to lobby, for some understanding. But they may or may not be in a place where they can do that. That sentiment around it would be easier to start over, that's the love addiction part of sex and love addiction. That's a fantasy that I'm a new person today and none of my history will follow me into a new relationship. So that's what makes sense, is to start all the way over.
Yeah, I won't cheat again on someone else.
or
until they change.
Or in 2 months of addiction recovery, I've learned how to be emotionally available and to do relationships, which I never knew how to do before. There's a lot of fantasy there. And that's important to know. That's part of what you're up against. And again, your partner's willingness to see that as fantasy or not. Would you be open to the idea that maybe a new relationship wouldn't fix these problems? Yeah, if I think about it, it probably won't. I probably need to do some work on that. Or you're crazy, a new relationship fixes every problem. That's why I've had 500 serious girlfriends over the course of my lifetime, because when we run into a problem, it's time to start a new one, and that fixes the problem. It's important for you to know kind of what you're up against. It's also, I hope you're not taking too seriously his commentary about where you're at, because there are a ton of emotions. The way that I explain this to couples that I work with is he's had however many years he's been in addiction to come to terms with what it is and to know the storyline. You're trying to condense whatever he's had years to, build and come to grips with. You're 2 months in. And on top of that, you didn't see this coming. So it's very, very disorienting. And that's not an excuse for you or for him. It's simply a statement of reality that this is a big hurdle to get over. There is a lot to work through here. And just like you might want your partner to be open to the idea that they could be in fantasy or that things might change in the future. I think it's important for spouses in recovery to recognize that the anger I feel today and what I want to do about it today, it may not be how I feel in the future. That might change for me as I continue to heal and as I continue to change. And the point isn't to get to the changed place. The point is to engage in the process and to let it go where it needs to go. I think being able to say to your partner, it's not that I'm unwilling to forgive you. It's that 2 months isn't really enough time for me to get used to what the new you is. Remember, for 2 years, I didn't think there was a second you, and then I found out there was. It's going to take me some time, and I'll try to be patient, and I'll try to work on myself and my emotions so I don't overwhelm you with them all the time. But I am going to have them, and I need you to be patient with my process as well.
Yeah, and Dr. Rob makes the point in Out of the Doghouse. Sorry, the trash truck is outside. Hang on.
They have a new schedule. I don't think I've ever heard that.
It's Tuesdays, but usually it's much later in the day. So Dr. Rob makes the point that, and he's writing in Out of the Doghouse to addicts or to cheaters, not to the betrayed partners, although a lot of betrayed partners read the book and get a lot out of it. He writes that, you've known about your behavior since the very beginning, usually for years. Guys who cheat tend to start doing it in, their very first relationship. They've got a girlfriend their freshman year of high school, and they're, chasing her girlfriends, or some girl at another, and that pattern continues, and they've known about it their whole life. Like Jon said, they've come to terms with it. And you just got run over by a truck, basically, when you found out, like, oh, he's been cheating on me. He's been looking at porn and sleeping around and going to the strip club. Oh my God. And it's all new. It's literally like being hit by a truck, but an emotional truck. And it is going to take you some time. And Dr. Rob explains to the cheaters in the book, your wife is going to be on an emotional roller coaster, and you're going to be on your own roller coaster in recovery, and it's not the same roller coaster. So you may be feeling like, hey, I really want to make this work, and your wife may not be there, or she may be feeling like, hey, I want to make this work, and you may not be there. And you'll just eventually, you kind of get on the same roller coaster a little bit, and things start to settle down. But it takes, as Jon said, a year, 18 months sometimes. So yeah, it's a statement in a comment, but I wanted to bring this up and ask you a question, Jon. I used to get hurt when my husband refused to meet my needs. My changing point was radically accepting that he was incapable of ever meeting my needs. Then realizing I could meet my own needs. I let go of controlling and manipulating him to meet my needs, which opened me up to self-reliance, aka nobody's coming. The question I want to ask, because I know who this person is, and she is still with her husband. Is it possible to have a good relationship when one of the parties is incapable of meeting the other party's needs?
The foundation of a good relationship is reality. I see you as you really are. The biggest example of this in my life is my relationship with my father. Over the years, I've had a lot of grief and a lot of heartache and a lot of anger, because he does what he does really well, and what he doesn't do well, it's like it doesn't exist in the universe. And as soon as I accepted that that's who he is, one of the things that happened is I stopped expecting from him what he really couldn't do and wasn't interested in doing. And there was a part of me for a long time that would say, if you can't do this, I have no need of being in a relationship with you. Well, there's really good reasons for me to continue a relationship with him. It's just not that kind of relationship. And I point to that as because I think it's similar. You can certainly have a good relationship with somebody as long as you know who they are and you accept their limitations. Even in healthy, happy relationships, that's not based on we stretch and do the impossible for each other all the time. It's based on this really, basic ground level knowledge of I know who this person is, I know what they're good at, and I know what they're not good at, and I live in that reality with them rather than continually lobbying for them to be someone who they aren't.
Yeah, and that's why I brought that up. I really wanted that point to be made. I mean, I look at my parents, they're both in their 80s now, but this was about 20 years ago, and the dryer broke at their house. And my father kept saying, oh, it just needs a new heating element, I'll fix it. And this went on for months. And I looked at my mother and said, you've been married to him for however many years it was at that point. Do you really believe he's ever going to fix the dryer? And she said, well, no. I said, okay, then call the repairman, because you're right. He's never going to fix it. Accept it and do something about it. Otherwise, you're going to be like spinning your clothes for hours because the dryer never gets hot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they have a bad relationship. It just means my father says he'll fix things and never does it. It's who he is. God bless him. So yeah, it can still be a good relationship. Just you don't get, some of your more important needs met. And I like that this individual is able to find other ways to get those needs met. I'm 14 months in after I found out, so I assume that's after initial discovery. Before I found out that my whole life was a lie, my spouse is not an addict, but he has a mental disorder, and he was acting and performing being someone he isn't. It is shocking, and he just wanted me to forget and start again without any recovery work. It was only temporary behavior change and not a heart transformation. He left me again. Today, my heart felt scared to go on without him. But like you said, there is no rescue boat coming. I have to learn to live alone if I like it or not. But I was actually alone all these years.
Yes, yes, that's the point. I think a lot of that, recognizing nobody's coming, I think rarely is it that somebody had this capacity and they failed us. It's more recognizing it was actually never that way. And that is so much grief and that is so much heartache. But when we can feel reality as it is, there's actually something we can do about it. It's the trying to bend reality into what we need it to be, what we wanted it to be, what it even should have been. That is always a losing scenario because unless we watch a lot of Marvel movies at my house, unless you're Thanos with the reality stone, you really can't change that. It really is what it is. And I thank you so much for sharing that because I think that gets right to the point. I have to learn to live alone if I like it or not, but I was actually alone all these years. It's not like you haven't been doing it. It's just in the past you thought that you weren't.
Yeah, and that kind of also hits some of the point that I was talking about earlier is, um, I hate harping on men, but a guy who cheats has probably cheated his whole life and is going to continue cheating until he makes a heart and soul change.
Yeah.
And sometimes with the mental illness, that's not possible. Um, you know, usually it is possible if he wants to do it. But it's not always possible. And it sounds like in this instance, maybe it wasn't. If he has a mental illness that prevents that sort of honesty and soul searching, yeah, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. There's no betrayal that hurts more than the loss of the relationship trust or what you believe the relationship is. Nothing hurts more than that. I mean, am I right with that, John? Or
Absolutely, because that's the risk we take getting into relationships with each other. Your brain can go one of two ways with another human being. You can be at war with them or you can be in love with them. And our brains are really good at doing both, like to volume 11. And when we're actually more wired to be at war with each other than we are to be in love with each other. And so when we do that in love with each other, it's actually a choice that we make. I'm going to put down my defenses. I'm going to trust you with information and closeness to me that you could destroy me with this. And I think that's the heart of intimate betrayal, not so much who you slept with, it's what you did with what you knew about me. It's the disregard, it's the lack of care, it's the lack of empathy. That is a huge betrayal because you overcame every tendency, every biological tendency in you to not trust this person and you chose to.
yeah, trash bag back. We have multiple trash picks ups. There's one for the green stuff and there's one for the recycling. So can you talk a little bit about vulnerability after this deep betrayal? Because all of the questions we've gotten today have been from somebody who was deeply, deeply betrayed. What is it like to become vulnerable again at some point down the line, whether it's in the same relationship or a new one?
Yeah, I'll share a personal experience here because that's what jumps to mind for me. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of staying at a monastery in Malibu and going to a leadership intensive. And this wasn't just sitting in a classroom, learning about tenets of leadership. It was actually like really experiential. And as part of the retreat, the people that I went with after getting to know me, we didn't use real names. I had an alias. I was known as Animal that week. And yeah, there's a long story behind that. But so they didn't even really know who I was. But after observing me for a few days, this group got together and we called it a design. They made a design to help me with something that I needed. And it started with the feedback they gave me was, your face is really hard and you look like you hate everybody. We're scared to get to know you. And then they had me talk about different, like, big emotional parts of my life, and everybody chimed in. I could see that you were sad because your eyes went down. I saw that tear. I heard it in your voice, and they really validated me. The big part of it, though, was the next morning, the old guy that ran it, he's like this, 85-year-old wizard, has been doing this stuff forever. I'm headed over to the dining hall. This is the last day. And he kind of blusters up to me and he says, I've been awake with you in my head since 4:30 this morning. And I was like, oh no, I did something wrong. And he said, I have something to say to you. Are you open to hearing it? And I said, sure. And he said, what I watched yesterday, you telling, you talking about your family and you talking about what meant to you, what that meant to you. He said, you are so open and so accessible, and, people love that from you. He said this story about how everyone's going to reject you and how you have to be protected and, look out for how people are going to hurt you. He said, that has to end. It ends right now. And I said, Rod, I'm a therapist. You have a background in this. It's not that simple. And he says, it is that simple. It's a choice that you'll make to see the world in a different way. And I was really mad at him for probably half the day, because I was like, great, I spent all this money, all this time away from my family, and he doesn't get it. And then it dawned on me, like, it really is a choice. That's what vulnerability is. Vulnerability is actually not a physiological state. It starts with a decision that we make, that despite what the story has been to this point, or despite what the world has shown us to this point, we're open to new information. And it's a choice to look for a different storyline. Vulnerability always comes with risk, because it's a decision that we make independently from the behavior of others. I've worked with a lot of couples where, the addict, for all intents and purposes, he really is a trustworthy person now. And his spouse is not vulnerable, and his spouse isn't open to seeing that. Now, that's not necessarily the general rule, but it happens. And that's because the spouse has not made the decision to be vulnerable. It's not because he's done all the right things and now she can, or now he can. It's that decision hasn't been made, because it is a big decision and it's not an easy one to make. I've also seen the other side, where a spouse has chosen, I'm going to trust you, and they shouldn't have. And there's a part of me that almost screams from the other side of the room, don't do it. Like, he's full of it. He's going to hurt you again. But you can't really change course once the decision's been made, once it's really been made. This is what I'm committed to. And that's what vulnerability is. Vulnerability does not come after trust. It actually precedes it. We don't get to a place of healing and building trust unless we're willing to take a risk. And that's the part of vulnerability, is we have to calculate that risk. And part of what I spent half of that day thinking is, what do I really have to lose if I'm rejected one more time by people who don't really know me? And what I came to is, I have very little to lose and I have everything to gain. And it transformed things since then. Actually, I've gotten feedback from people who've known me for a long time. They're like, your face looks different. What's going on? And I said, I've decided that you don't hate me and want to hurt me. And it makes it easier to relax around you. Vulnerability is really a choice we make to be open to new storylines and new information.
Yeah. Now, by the way, type some questions into the Q&A. We're all caught up, but the choice to become vulnerable for a fearful person like myself, who is convinced that if you knew the real me, you would run screaming from the room, because I'm just obviously an awful human being on the inside. I can make that choice to be vulnerable, and I've done it, and it's very, very hard, but I find that I have to repeatedly make that choice. I have to make it all the time. I am going to show you the real me. I am going to tell the truth. It hasn't sunk in for me that vulnerability is okay. I have to make the choice. Is that common? Do you have to do that, or has it sunk in?
Yeah, it's I think the biggest thing that helps me make the choice is when I'm cuddling with my dogs and I realize this part of the world is okay, maybe more of it is okay, because I don't think my default setting will ever be anything else. It's that recognizing that nobody's coming. There's nothing that's going to happen to change my default setting. In many ways, I've given up on that default setting changing. But I do recognize that I always have a choice in every situation. And I can let it play out from that position of default setting, or I can put myself in a position that carries some risk, but also carries a lot greater reward. So I'm constantly remaking that decision almost on a daily basis, if not several times a day, that I'm going to keep doing this vulnerability thing, because the most recent track record I have with it is that, despite some bumps and bruises and maybe even some big heartache in that process, overall, it's so much better for me.
Trash truck is back. Apparently we're getting, it's like the trash hour. As an addict, my default setting is that I don't trust other people. I don't trust that they will meet my needs. I don't trust that they will respond to me. I don't trust they'll take care of me. So it's very hard to become vulnerable. That's why I turned to things that were very reliable, like alcohol and drugs and porn and sex, non-intimate sex. They were, I knew that they were going to create a certain response, however temporary. That's how addicts are built. But for a non-addict who's in relationship with an addict, they're more open to that connection, I think. Addicts are scared of connection, whereas non-addicts are less scared of it. Is it easier for the betrayed partner to open up again than for the addict to open up, or is it just different?
I think it's just really different. I think for a lot of betrayed partners, when they really get it, like what addiction is. I was working with a couple yesterday, and he had had a relapse, and he said, I feel like your expectation is that I never relapse. And she said, that's not the expectation, but I want you to know I will never, ever be okay with you relapsing. And so she said, there's a part of me that I think has consigned itself to me that there will always be this kind of heartache. She said, the bigger heartache for me is when you don't get back on the horse quickly, and you spiral in that place of, well, I don't know if I want this. And she said, because I love being with you when you're sober and you're committed to recovery, even if you're not doing it perfectly. It's different. He had it in his mind, like when he relapses, well, it's all over and nobody could love me. And she's saying, I can love you even when you're, cutting out my heart with a knife because you're relapsing. Just don't do it forever. So it is different. I do think that spouses in general, they have an easier time coming around to that. Like, there are second chances and there is benefit of the doubt. A lot of addicts don't do that because, number one, they don't believe that they deserve a second chance. There's a lot of shame. And then the other thing is, a lot of them don't come from relationships where that was a thing. It was, you toe the line, and if you mess up, you're out in the cold and there's no coming back.
Yeah, a lot of addicts had very, very rigid upbringings. Mine certainly was, and it did a number on me in a lot of respects. But so this is a follow up to the person who said she's had to learn to live alone, like it or not. But then she says, I was actually alone all these years. So she wants to know how she should respond in a prodependent way, preferably when this person comes back broken. I assume looking for, to get back together or solace or whatever. I'm afraid that this will happen. It has happened in the past. I'm afraid it'll happen again. So how should she respond if he comes crawling back, basically?
Yeah. I think the prodependent response, it doesn't negate or doesn't put on the sideline any of your needs or any of the reality you see. So while the person may be coming back broken, and what they want to hear from you is, I believe in you, I think you can do this. I don't think in the long run it's kind to not hold reality. So I think being able to say, it breaks my heart when you're in this place because I think that you think you mean it, or I can see that right now you mean it. What I've learned from being in a relationship with you is that other guy comes along and then you don't mean any of it and you forget all of it. And depending on where you are at, you may be in a place where you say, I'm willing to go to the rodeo again. Just know that, I'm expecting this to change, and what I need from you is XYZ. Can you focus on that and provide me XYZ when you go back to this place? or you say, and I've looked at this, or the other alternative is I've seen this over and over again, and I'm not actually convinced that this lasts forever. And I feel sad that this breaks your heart. It breaks my heart too. But I can't keep putting myself in a position where I know you're going to move the football. You know, that old Lucy and Charlie Brown says it's okay to come to kick the football, and she moves it every time. Can't keep putting myself in a position where you move the football. I'm not going to do that anymore. And I hope that you can find healing for your broken heart, and I'm going to find healing for my broken heart. Again, I think you can be kind. Just kindness is not divorced from reality. In fact, I think the most kind thing is to hold reality for someone who's desperately trying to run away from it.
Yeah, you know, one of the real tenets of prodependence is setting healthy boundaries and knowing how, you know, and healthy boundaries are not about the other person. They're about you. They're about, you know, my boundaries are not about John. They're about how I will respond if John behaves in a certain way. And I let him know, you know, when you behave that way, I feel this way, and this is how I will respond. Or a boundary can be, we're done, or we're not done. Maybe we're done, you know. But it's about having your healthy boundaries and knowing what they are and really sticking to them as a practice of self-care and self-safety. I didn't state that very well, but I think maybe you know what I mean. So I'm an addict and the partner of the person who asked the questions about starting from scratch, etc. I agree with your feedback and am receptive to it. I want to support my partner in her and our recovery, but I'm struggling with the limits she puts on my behavior. I think it reminds me a lot of my childhood with a very punitive mother who was also a sex, love, alcohol addict, who was very controlling and manipulative. I want to support my partner, but sometimes don't know how. And yes, feeling overwhelmed by that sometimes makes me want to run away like I did from my mom.
Dude, huge points for chiming in here. That's awesome that you guys are attending this together, and that there's actually a dialogue. Your biggest asset in there, I think, is you saying, I really don't know how to do this. It's a very real thing, I think, to struggle with boundaries, because in practice, in delivery, I think there's actually very little difference between boundaries and control. And that's not because boundaries are controlling. It's because there's a fine line, just like with everything that leads to healthy relationships. It's not like it's so far on this end of the spectrum it's noticeable. It's a real fine line. So that's where I would encourage you to focus. I'm struggling with the limits that she puts on my behavior. That's a true statement. And I don't know what to do about this. This reminds me so much of my mom. You have so many places that you can start there. You may want to start by, you know, taking a deep dive on what boundaries actually are and identifying some of your own, not as like a, you know, you get to do yours, now I get to do mine, but more as a way of this is a healthy thing in our relationship to just explain to each other what we need, what's helpful and what's not helpful, and what our options are when we're getting what we need from our relationship and when we're not getting what we need from our relationship. So looking at what boundaries are, I think, could be huge in helping to change that perception. I also think some work, when you and your therapist agree that you're ready for it, some work on how your mom is superimposed with your partner, which is a very, very common issue. The people who are our primary caregivers, they actually imprint on our limbic system, the most basic part of us that has like fear, fight, flight. So for a lot of the guys that I work with, the discomfort in their partner setting boundaries, it's almost like mom's face is superimposed on that and they can't tell the difference. There very likely is a difference, unless you just picked somebody who's exactly like your mom, which I doubt, because you're both here and you're both talking about this. So working on kind of pulling that apart emotionally and understanding what limits and healthy boundaries are and what control is. And then the third thing is, every day wake up in that place. It's a recovery paradox. If you can wake up every day saying, I really don't know what I'm doing, and if I pretend like I do, there will probably be, you know, some disastrous results. When we realize that we don't know what we're doing, this is the other side of nobody's coming. When I know that I don't know what I'm doing, I talk to people. talking to a sponsor, talking to other people in your group, when you feel emotionally ready for it, talking to your partner, help me see what I'm not seeing. What is it that you need that it looks like I don't get? And then instead of getting defensive, take notes. Hey, I'll take this to my sponsor. I'll take this to my group. I'll take this to my therapist. I'll really think about this. Because what you don't know now can be learned. And the good news is you don't have to carry around an encyclopedia of your partner at all times and intuitive. When you don't know what to do, you can always stop and say, this is one of those tricky situations and I'm not sure exactly what to do. Can you give me an assist? Or, being willing to pick up the phone and tell your sponsor, we're in that place again. Can you help me with some perspective? Help me see what I'm not seeing here. Because I really don't know what I'm doing. That's recovery gold, being able to admit that.
Yeah, I was just about to say the most hopeful thing I've heard all day is I don't know how.
Yep.
You saying I don't know how, that's like such a hopeful thing for an addict to say. It's like, because somebody might. Yeah. So yeah, that's really cool. And boundaries. Often I remind the addicts that I work with, when your partner's setting boundaries, it's not about keeping you out or controlling you. It's about letting you in safely.
Yep.
And you can set the same kind of boundaries. I want to let you in, and you have to respect each other's boundaries. There's a give and take in terms of letting each other in safely.
Yep.
And there's going to be a lot of trial and error with that process. That's normal. So
yeah, and it's not a bad thing to hit error. It's just another, we were doing this dance and I didn't realize you had your foot there and I stepped on it, but you always have your foot there, don't you? That's how you dance. I can cope with that. We can adjust.
Yeah. So cool. Thank you, everybody. Really interesting session, and I just love the topic. Nobody's coming, and how it applies to relationships and recovery, more than just the pandemic. So thank you, Jon. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your questions. We will be back in 2 weeks. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll see you then. Anything you want to do to take us out, Jon?
No, just thank you, everybody, for coming here. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I love doing this every couple of weeks, and I'll be excited to see you guys at the beginning of December.
See you then.
Yeah.